2 months had passed since that morning at the cafe. The viral storm had eventually calmed, as these things always do. The internet had moved on to the next story, the next outrage, the next viral moment. But the people directly involved found that their lives had changed in permanent ways, some for better and some for worse. Tommy's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The cafe had become a destination spot, with tourists sometimes stopping by hoping to meet the young man who'd captured hearts across the internet. Linda had promoted him to a supervisory role, where he helped train new employees. It was a responsibility he took seriously, always emphasizing to newcomers that every customer deserved kindness and respect, no matter who they were or how they treated you. Several other businesses in the area had reached out to Linda, asking for advice about hiring employees with disabilities. She'd become an unofficial consultant on the topic, sharing what she'd learned from working with Tommy. More importantly, she'd connected these business owners with advocacy organizations that could provide proper training and support. The ripple effect was real. At least a dozen new jobs had been created in the community for people with intellectual disabilities, all traced back to that one viral moment. Tommy had also been invited to speak at schools and community events. At first, Patricia had worried it would be too much pressure, too overwhelming for her son. But Tommy had surprised her, as he often did. He was a natural speaker, his authenticity and warmth connecting with audiences in ways that polished professionals couldn't match. He talked about his experiences, about the importance of inclusion, about how everyone has value regardless of their differences. At one high school, a student had asked Tommy if he was angry at Richard for what he'd done. Tommy had thought about it carefully before answering. "I was hurt," he'd said honestly. "I cried and I felt bad about myself for a little while. But my mom taught me that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. So no, I'm not angry. I'm actually grateful." The students had looked confused at that. Grateful for being humiliated? Tommy had smiled his gentle smile. "I'm grateful because what happened showed me how many good people there are in the world. All those customers who stood up for me, Keanu who defended me, my boss who protected me, and all of you watching the video and sending nice messages. There was one mean person, but there were hundreds of thousands of kind people. That's what I choose to remember." His words had gone viral again, clipped and shared as an example of grace and forgiveness. But Tommy didn't do it for the attention. He genuinely meant what he said. He'd processed the trauma of that morning and emerged from it with his fundamental kindness intact. Keanu had stayed in touch with Tommy, occasionally stopping by the cafe when he was in the area. They'd developed an unlikely friendship, the movie star and the cafe worker, bonded by a shared moment of standing up for what's right. Keanu had invited Tommy and Patricia to visit a movie set, where Tommy had been thrilled to see how films were made. The crew had loved him, and several behind-the-scenes photos of Tommy laughing with the cast had made their way onto social media, keeping the feel-good story alive. During one of their conversations over coffee, Tommy had asked Keanu why he'd intervened that day. "You didn't have to help me," Tommy had said. "You could have just stayed in your seat." Keanu had set down his cup, considering the question seriously. "When I was younger, I was bullied sometimes. Different reasons than you. But I know what it feels like to be treated like you're less than others. And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to stand up for someone else going through that, I would. You gave me that chance, Tommy, so really I should be thanking you." The cafe itself had become something of a landmark. People came not just for the coffee, though it was good, but for what the place represented. It had become a symbol of community, of standing together against cruelty, of the idea that ordinary places could be sites of extraordinary moments. Linda had framed several news articles about the incident and hung them on the wall, not as self-promotion but as a reminder to everyone who worked there about what they stood for. She'd also implemented new training for all staff on how to handle difficult customers and how to support each other when things got hard. The incident with Richard had shown her that while she'd created a good work environment, there was always room to do better, to be more intentional about protection and support. Richard's story was more complicated. The indefinite leave from Thornton Financial had become a quiet termination. He'd received a severance package on the condition that he sign a non-disclosure agreement and non-disparagement clause. His career in high-level finance was over. No company wanted to touch him, not with the baggage he carried. For the first month, he'd been bitter and angry, convinced he was a victim of cancel culture, of an overly sensitive society that couldn't take a joke or handle honesty. He'd consulted with lawyers about defamation suits, about suing the cafe or the people who'd posted the videos. But every lawyer he spoke to told him the same thing. He'd lose and he'd make everything worse. The videos showed exactly what had happened with no editing or manipulation. He had no case. Slowly, very slowly, the anger had given way to something else. Depression at first. He'd spent weeks barely leaving his house, drinking too much, avoiding mirrors because he couldn't stand to see himself. His ex-wife's interview where she'd talked about his pattern of treating service workers poorly, of his need to feel superior, of his anger issues. All of it had been painful because it was true. He recognized himself in her descriptions, and the recognition was devastating. His therapist, one of the few people who still had to interact with him professionally, had been blunt. You can either let this destroy you or you can let it rebuild you. Right now, you're at rock bottom. The question is, what kind of person do you want to be when you climb back up? It was a question Richard was still wrestling with. He'd started doing something he never thought he would: volunteering. A local food bank had accepted him, mostly because they were desperate for help and willing to take anyone. The other volunteers had recognized him, and the first few days had been awkward and tense. But gradually, as he showed up consistently, did the work without complaint, and treated everyone with basic respect, the tension had eased. One day, an older volunteer named Helen had approached him during a break. "I know who you are and what you did," she'd said matter-of-factly. Richard had braced himself for condemnation, but instead she'd continued, "But I also see you here doing the work trying to make amends. That takes courage. Don't waste this chance to become better." Her words had hit him harder than any of the online hate or public shaming. Someone was giving him a chance, not because they'd forgotten what he'd done, but despite remembering it, it was more grace than he deserved, and he knew it. Richard had started writing letters, none of which he'd sent. Letters to Tommy, apologizing and trying to explain, though he knew there was no explanation that would suffice. Letters to his ex-wife, acknowledging the truth in what she'd said. Letters to his parents, trying to understand where his sense of superiority had come from. Writing them was therapeutic, even if he never intended to mail them. It was a way of confronting himself, of admitting who he'd been and imagining who he might become. 3 months after the incident, Richard did something that took more courage than he knew he had. He returned to the cafe, not to eat, not to confront anyone, but to apologize. He'd called ahead, speaking with Linda and asking if Tommy would be willing to see him. Linda had been skeptical, protective of her employee, but she'd asked Tommy, and Tommy, being Tommy, had agreed. They met early one morning before the cafe opened. Richard walked in to find Tommy sitting at a table with Linda standing protectively nearby. Keanu had also come, having heard about the meeting and wanting to support Tommy. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Richard stood awkwardly near the door, clutching a piece of paper. "I wrote down what I wanted to say because I was afraid I'd mess it up if I tried to do it from memory." His voice was shaky, nothing like the confident, arrogant tone from 3 months ago. "Tommy, I owe you an apology. What I said to you was cruel, discriminatory, and completely inexcusable. I treated you as less than human, and there's no justification for that." He paused, his hands trembling. "I've spent the last 3 months trying to understand why I did it, and the truth is complicated and not very flattering. I was angry about things in my own life. I was taught growing up that success meant being better than others, and somewhere along the way I started believing that made me better than others as a person. I was wrong. So incredibly wrong." Tommy listened quietly, his expression unreadable. Linda watched Richard with hard eyes, looking for any sign of insincerity. Keanu stood with his arms crossed, protective but allowing Richard to speak. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Richard continued. "I'm not here to ask for that. I just needed you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. You're not just good at your job. You're exceptional at being human in ways I never was. You showed kindness and dignity when I showed neither. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Tommy stood up and walked toward Richard. For a moment, Richard tensed, unsure what was about to happen. But Tommy simply extended his hand for a handshake. "I forgive you," Tommy said simply. "I hope you become happier." Richard took his hand, and to everyone's surprise, including his own, he started crying. Not the angry tears of self-pity he'd shed in private, but genuine tears of remorse and relief. "Thank you," he managed to choke out. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." Tommy just smiled his gentle smile. "Everyone deserves a second chance. That's what my mom says." Richard didn't stay long after that. He thanked Linda for allowing the meeting and nodded respectfully to Keanu. As he left, he felt lighter than he had in months. The forgiveness didn't erase what he'd done, and it didn't solve all his problems, but it gave him something he'd lost, hope that he could become better. After Richard left, Keanu turned to Tommy. "You didn't have to forgive him, you know. What he did was terrible." Tommy nodded. "I know, but holding on to anger would hurt me more than him, and maybe forgiving him will help him change. Isn't that better for everyone?" Keanu smiled and shook his head in amazement. "You know, Tommy, I've met a lot of people in my life. Presidents, philosophers, spiritual leaders, but I think you might be wiser than all of them." Tommy laughed. "I just try to be kind. It's not that complicated." But it was that simple wisdom, that uncomplicated kindness that had transformed a moment of cruelty into a lesson in grace. The story had started with discrimination and ended with forgiveness, had begun with viral outrage and concluded with quiet redemption. Years later, Tommy would still be working at the cafe, still greeting customers with his infectious smile. Richard would have rebuilt a quieter life, working in financial consulting at a much smaller scale and volunteering regularly with disability advocacy groups, trying in small ways to counter the harm he'd once caused. Keanu would continue to be Keanu, using his platform to shine light on kindness wherever he found it. But the real legacy of that Tuesday morning wasn't in the individual stories. It was in the thousands of people who'd watched the video and been inspired to stand up when they saw injustice. It was in the businesses that reconsidered their hiring practices. It was in the parents of children with disabilities who felt a little more hope for their kids' futures. It was in the countless small moments of kindness that rippled outward from one act of standing up for what's right. Tommy had been right about one thing. There had been one mean person that day, but there had been hundreds of thousands of kind people, and in the end, the kind people had won, not through anger or revenge, but through compassion, solidarity, and the simple insistence that everyone, regardless of their differences, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. That was the lesson. That was the story. And that was why, long after the internet had moved on to the next viral moment, people still talked about the morning when cruelty met kindness in a small cafe on Maple Street, and kindness won. Within 2 hours of Richard leaving the cafe, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times. By lunchtime, it had crossed 1 million. The internet, for all its flaws and toxicity, could sometimes come together in remarkable ways when it witnessed genuine injustice. And this story had everything people responded to: a vulnerable person being mistreated, a beloved celebrity standing up for what's right, and a villain whose arrogance made him easy to condemn. Tommy had no idea about any of this at first. He'd finished his shift at the cafe, gone home to the small apartment he shared with his mother, and told her about the strange morning he'd had. His mother, Patricia, had listened with growing horror and then overwhelming pride. She'd hugged her son tightly and told him how brave he'd been. Then she'd made him his favorite lunch, grilled cheese with tomato soup, and they'd watched television. Together like they did most afternoons. It wasn't until Tommy's phone started buzzing repeatedly, with messages from co-workers and old high school friends, that Patricia decided to check what was happening online. What she found made her cry. The video was everywhere. News sites had picked it up. Disability advocacy groups were sharing it. Celebrities were commenting on it. And overwhelmingly, the response was support for Tommy and condemnation for Richard. One comment that particularly touched Patricia came from a parent who wrote, "My daughter has Down syndrome. She's 8 now, and I worry every day about the world she'll face as she grows up. Seeing Tommy stand there with such dignity and seeing people defend him gives me hope. Thank you to everyone at that cafe, and especially to Keanu Reeves for showing my daughter that there are still good people in the world." Linda's phone hadn't stopped ringing either. News outlets wanted interviews. Disability rights organizations wanted to feature the cafe in their campaigns. Random people were calling to place orders or to simply say thank you. She'd had to hire her nephew to help manage the sudden influx of attention because she couldn't handle it alone while running the cafe. But the attention wasn't just positive. Richard's company, Thornton Financial, was being bombarded with complaints and negative reviews. Their social media accounts were flooded with people demanding Richard be fired. News reporters had started showing up at their downtown office building, trying to get statements. The company's stock price had even dipped slightly as investors worried about the PR nightmare unfolding. By evening, Thornton Financial released a brief statement. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our employees. We are investigating the matter thoroughly and take all allegations of discriminatory behavior seriously. We do not condone any form of harassment or disrespect." It was corporate speak that said everything and nothing at once, the kind of statement designed to buy time while they figured out how to handle the crisis. Richard himself had gone silent. His personal social media accounts had been made private or deleted entirely. His phone number had somehow leaked online, forcing him to change it. His neighbors reported seeing reporters camping outside his upscale suburban home. One enterprising journalist had even tracked down his ex-wife, who apparently had quite a bit to say about his character, none of it flattering. Meanwhile, Keanu had posted a simple message on his social media. "Today I witnessed both the worst and best of humanity. I saw cruelty, but I also saw courage. Tommy, if you're reading this, you're an inspiration. To everyone else, be kind. It costs nothing and means everything." The post received millions of likes and tens of thousands of comments, most sharing similar stories of discrimination they or their loved ones had faced. 3 days after the incident, Richard's lawyer issued a statement claiming his client had been under extreme stress due to personal matters and that his words didn't reflect his true character. The statement included a generic apology. Mr. Thornton deeply regrets his actions and the hurt they caused. He is committed to learning from this experience and becoming a better person. But the apology felt hollow, forced by circumstances rather than born from genuine remorse. The court of public opinion wasn't buying it. People dug into Richard's past, finding other instances of poor behavior. A former secretary came forward with stories of how he'd treated support staff at his office. College classmates shared anecdotes about his sense of entitlement even back then. The picture that emerged was of someone whose behavior at the cafe wasn't an aberration but a pattern. On the 5th day, Thornton Financial made their decision. They announced that Richard had been placed on indefinite leave pending the outcome of their investigation, but everyone understood what that meant. He was done. His career in finance, at least at that level, was effectively over. The company couldn't afford to keep him, not with the daily protests outside their building and the clients threatening to pull their accounts. Tommy, meanwhile, had become something of a local celebrity. People came to the cafe specifically hoping to meet him. He handled the attention with characteristic humility, always making sure to redirect praise to Linda and his coworkers. "I just do my job," he'd say with a shrug. "Everyone here works hard." Linda had to hire additional staff to handle the increased business. The cafe that had been comfortably profitable was now packed every day. She felt conflicted about it, uncomfortable that Tommy's painful experience had somehow become good for business. She talked to Tommy about it, worried he might feel exploited. Tommy thought about it seriously, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he smiled. "I think it's good, actually. Maybe people will be nicer to others like me now. Maybe some other place will hire someone with Down syndrome, because they saw that we can do a good job. That would make what happened worth it." His perspective amazed Linda. Here was someone who'd been publicly humiliated, who'd been reduced to tears by a stranger's cruelty, and he was focusing on how the experience might help others. It was a level of emotional maturity that many people never achieved. A week after the incident, Tommy was invited to speak at a local event organized by a disability advocacy group. He was nervous, never having spoken in front of a large crowd before. Patricia helped him prepare, but she made sure the words were his own, not rehearsed speeches written by others. On the night of the event, Tommy stood at a podium in a community center packed with people. His hands shook as he held his note cards and his voice wavered at first. "Hi, my name is Tommy and I have Down syndrome," he began. "A week ago, something bad happened to me at work. A man was mean to me because of how I look and how I talk. It hurt my feelings a lot." He paused, gathering his courage. "But then something good happened too. Other people stood up for me. My boss stood up for me. Customers I didn't even know stood up for me. And Keanu Reeves, who I didn't know was even there, stood up for me. This got a small laugh from the audience, breaking some of the tension. I want to say thank you to everyone who helped me that day. And I want to say something to other people like me who might be watching or listening. We belong here. We belong in schools and jobs and communities. We're not charity cases or diversity hires or whatever that man called me. We're people. We work hard, we care about others, and we deserve respect. The room erupted in applause. People stood, many wiping tears from their eyes. Tommy looked overwhelmed but happy. Patricia, watching from the front row, couldn't have been more proud. After the speech, dozens of people came up to thank Tommy, to share their own stories, to tell him he'd given them courage. Keanu had sent a video message that was played at the event. Tommy, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I wanted you to know how proud I am of you. What you did that day, standing there with dignity when someone tried to tear you down, that's real heroism, not the kind in movies, but the kind that actually matters. Keep being you, keep being kind, and keep showing the world what's possible. That night, as Tommy and Patricia drove home, he was quieter than usual. Mom, he said eventually, do you think that man will ever be happy? The one who was mean to me? Patricia thought carefully about her answer. I don't know, honey. Some people carry a lot of anger inside them. Sometimes they don't even know why. Maybe this will help him change, or maybe it won't. But that's not your responsibility. You can't fix everyone. I know, Tommy said. But I still feel a little bit sorry for him. He must be very sad inside to need to hurt other people like that. Patricia pulled the car over briefly, turning to look at her son. You know what, Tommy? Right there. That's exactly why you're such a good person. Even after everything, you're thinking about his pain. Don't ever lose that kindness, okay? The world needs it. But while Tommy was thinking compassionate thoughts about Richard himself was spiraling. Locked in his home, avoiding the press, watching his life disintegrate online, he felt more alone than he ever had. His phone calls weren't being returned. Friends had distanced themselves. His professional reputation was in ruins, and the worst part was he couldn't even claim it was unfair. He'd done this to himself. Late at night, unable to sleep, Richard found himself watching the video again. Seeing himself through others' eyes was excruciating. The sneer on his face, the condescension in his voice, the casual cruelty of his words, all of it made him cringe. Was this really who he'd become? Had he always been this person? Or had success and money slowly corrupted something fundamental in his character? He thought about Tommy's face, the confusion and hurt there, and for the first time he felt genuine shame rather than just embarrassment at being caught. Richard's face had turned from red to almost purple. The applause from the other customers seemed to infuriate him even more. He pointed a shaking finger at Linda. You're making a huge mistake. A huge mistake. When I'm done with this place, you'll be lucky to have any customers at all. I'll make sure everyone knows about this disaster of an establishment. Keanu stepped forward, positioning himself more directly between Richard and Tommy. His voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable firmness to it. Before you leave and start making threats, I think there's something you should understand. These people, he gestured around the cafe, they're recording this. In about an hour, maybe less, this is going to be all over the internet. Your name, your company, everything you said. So maybe you should think carefully about your next moves. Richard laughed, but it sounded forced and hollow. You think I'm scared of social media? Please, I have lawyers. I have PR people. This will blow over in a day. But even as he said it, his eyes darted nervously to the phones pointed in his direction. In the back of his mind, he had to know that things had changed in recent years. People lost jobs over viral videos all the time. Careers ended because of moments like this. Linda pulled out her own phone. I'm calling the police if you don't leave in the next 30 seconds. You've harassed my employee, disturbed my other customers, and you're now trespassing. Your choice. Before Richard could respond, Mr. Peterson stood up from his corner table. The elderly man, who must have been in his 70s, walked slowly toward the confrontation. Young man, he said to Richard, his voice carrying the weight of decades, I've been coming to this cafe every single day for 5 years. And in all that time, Tommy has never once been anything but wonderful. He remembers that I like my coffee with 2 sugars and that I always order a blueberry muffin on Tuesdays. He paused, his eyes sharp and clear. You know what I remember about you? I remember that you're cruel, and I hope I never see you again. The mother with the toddler spoke up next. My son has autism. He's only 3, and I already worry about the world he's growing up in. I worry about people like you. Her voice cracked with emotion. But then I see people like Tommy and I have hope. Real hope that maybe kindness still matters. One of the college students, a young woman with bright blue hair, added her voice to the growing chorus. I have an older brother with Down syndrome. He's in his 30s now and he works at a grocery store. People like you make his life so much harder than it needs to be. He works twice as hard as anyone else just to prove he deserves to be there. It's exhausting for him and it's unfair. Richard looked around at all the faces staring at him with various combinations of anger, disgust, and disappointment. For a moment, just a brief moment, his aggressive facade cracked. He looked almost lost, like he suddenly realized he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But then his pride reasserted itself. You're all being ridiculous. I'm the victim here. I came in for a simple breakfast and now I'm being attacked by a mob. Keanu shook his head slowly. No, Richard. You're not the victim. You never were. You came in here with your prejudices and your sense of superiority, and you decided to tear down someone who was just trying to do his job. That's not being a victim. That's being a bully. Tommy had stopped crying now. He stood straighter, looking at all the people who had defended him. His face showed amazement and gratitude. Linda put her arm around his shoulders, giving him a supportive squeeze. Tommy, you don't have to stand here for this. Why don't you go in the back and take a break? I'll handle this. But Tommy shook his head. No, I want to stay. I want him to know that he didn't break me. He looked directly at Richard, and despite everything, there was no hatred in his eyes, just sadness and confusion. I don't understand why you're so mean, sir. Did I do something wrong? Did I say something that upset you? The question hung in the air, heavy with innocence and genuine confusion. It was perhaps the most devastating thing Tommy could have said, because it highlighted just how unprovoked and senseless Richard's cruelty had been. Richard had no answer. What could he say? That Tommy's very existence offended him? That he felt superior and wanted to demonstrate it? That he was having a bad day and decided to take it out on the nearest vulnerable target? Richard grabbed his briefcase and started toward the door, clearly eager to escape the situation. But Keanu wasn't quite ready to let him go. Richard, wait. Something in Keanu's tone made Richard pause, his hand on the door handle. I want you to think about something. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what do you think you'll remember about this morning? Will you remember the important business deal you were rushing to? Probably not. But you'll remember this moment. And you'll have to decide whether you're going to learn from it or just keep being the person you were today. Richard's hand tightened on the door handle. He turned back, and for the first time his expression wasn't angry or arrogant. It was something closer to shame, though he clearly didn't want to admit it. You don't know anything about me or my life, he said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. You're right, Keanu agreed. I don't know your story. Maybe you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you're dealing with things that make you lash out, but none of that excuses what happened here. None of that makes it okay to treat another human being the way you treated Tommy. The young mother spoke again, her voice softer now but no less firm. My therapist once told me something that stuck with me. She said that hurt people hurt people. Maybe you're hurting about something, but that doesn't give you the right to hurt others. Richard stood frozen at the door. The entire cafe waited in silence. It felt like a pivotal moment, like Richard might actually apologize, might actually show some genuine remorse. The seconds stretched out, heavy with possibility. Everyone could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. His mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again. Finally he spoke, and his voice was quieter than before. He stopped, seeming to wrestle with words that wouldn't come. Then, as if a switch flipped, his expression hardened again. I don't owe any of you anything. And with that, he pushed through the door and walked out into the bright morning sunlight. The door swung shut behind him, and for a moment no one moved. Then slowly the tension began to drain from the room. Keanu turned to Tommy with a warm smile. You okay, buddy? Tommy nodded, a small smile returning to his face. Yeah, I think so. Thank you for helping me. I didn't know what to do. You did exactly the right thing, Keanu assured him. You stayed professional, you stayed kind, and you stood your ground. That takes real courage. Linda was still on her phone. I got a picture of his business card before he left. I'm going to contact his company and file a formal complaint. This can't just slide. She looked at Tommy with fierce protectiveness. Nobody gets to treat my employees like that, nobody. The college student with blue hair approached Tommy shyly. Hey, I just wanted to say you handled that with so much grace. My brother would be proud to know you. Tommy's smile grew wider, and he thanked her earnestly. Mr. Peterson returned to his table, muttering under his breath about the decline of basic manners in society. The mother tried to explain to her confused toddler what had happened in simple terms about being kind to everyone. The other customers slowly returned to their conversations, though the atmosphere had changed. There was a sense of community now, of people who had witnessed something important and stood together. Keanu walked back to his corner booth with Tommy. Tell you what, I never got to order anything. How about you take my order, and we show everyone how it's supposed to be done? Tommy pulled out his notepad, his hands steadier now. What would you like, Mr. Reeves? Just Keanu, please. And I'll have my usual, black coffee, no sugar, and maybe one of those blueberry muffins Mr. Peterson is always raving about. Tommy wrote it down carefully, then looked up with a mischievous grin. I already knew your order. Black coffee, no sugar, extra napkins. I remember all my regulars. I know you do, Keanu said warmly. That's what makes you excellent at your job. As Tommy headed toward the counter to place the order, several customers stopped him to offer words of support. He accepted each one with genuine gratitude, his natural cheerfulness beginning to resurface. Linda watched him with obvious pride and relief. She caught Keanu's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded in acknowledgement. Outside, through the big windows, they could see Richard standing on the sidewalk, talking urgently on his phone. His body language was aggressive, his free hand gesturing wildly. Whatever conversation he was having, it didn't look pleasant. A few customers snapped pictures of him through the window, documenting the aftermath. One of the college students was already on her laptop, uploading the video to various social media platforms. "This is going to blow up," she said to her friend. "People need to see this. They need to see both sides, how cruel some people can be, but also how others stand up." And she was right. Even as the cafe tried to return to normal, even as Tommy brought Keanu his coffee and muffin, even as life attempted to move forward, the digital wheels were already turning. The story was spreading, jumping from phone to phone, screen to screen, growing with each share and comment. Tommy stood beside the table with his notepad ready, waiting for the businessman to respond. Richard looked up at him, and for a moment his expression shifted from impatience to something else. Something that made Tommy's smile falter just slightly. It was a look he'd seen before, though not often in this cafe. It was the look people gave him when they noticed his features, when they realized he had Down syndrome, when they made assumptions about what he could or couldn't do. "Are you kidding me right now?" Richard said, his voice loud enough that a few nearby customers turned their heads. "Is this seriously who they have taking orders? Where's the manager?" Tommy's smile stayed in place, though his eyes showed a flicker of confusion. He'd dealt with difficult customers before, but usually they were just impatient or having a bad day. This felt different. "I can help you, sir. I've been working here for 2 years. What would you like to order?" Richard let out a harsh laugh that had no humor in it. He looked around the cafe as if searching for witnesses to this apparent outrage. 2 years? They've actually kept you employed for 2 years? That's absolutely insane. He shook his head, making no effort to lower his voice. Several more customers had stopped their conversations now, sensing something unpleasant unfolding. From his corner booth, Keanu closed his book completely. His jaw tightened slightly, but he remained still, watching. He recognized what was happening, and a familiar anger started building in his chest. It was the same anger he felt whenever he witnessed bullying or cruelty, but he also knew that sometimes jumping in too quickly could make things worse. He waited, hoping someone would intervene, hoping the situation would resolve itself. Tommy's hands trembled slightly as he held his notepad, but his voice remained polite. "Sir, I promise I'm good at my job. I can take your order and bring you whatever you'd like. Our breakfast special today is really popular. It comes with eggs, toast, and your choice of bacon or sausage." "I don't want the breakfast special from you," Richard snapped. "I want someone competent to serve me. Someone who can actually understand a complex order. Someone who won't mess things up." He made a show of looking Tommy up and down with unconcealed disgust. "Look, it's not personal. I just don't have time for this diversity hire nonsense. Get me a real server." The words hit the cafe like a physical blow. The mother with the toddler gasped audibly. Mr. Peterson looked up from his crossword with shock on his face. The college students stopped typing, their mouths hanging open. And Tommy, Sweet Tommy, who tried so hard every single day, felt tears starting to well up in his eyes. I am real, Tommy said quietly, his voice breaking. I work really hard, sir. Please give me a chance. Richard wasn't done, though. He seemed to be feeding off the attention now, his voice growing even louder. You work hard? That's adorable. Listen, I'm sure you're trying your best, but your best probably isn't good enough for actual customers who are paying actual money. This is exactly what's wrong with this country. Everyone gets a participation trophy. Everyone gets a job regardless of whether they can actually do it. Well, I'm not participating in this nonsense. Linda, the owner, had been in the back room checking inventory when she heard the commotion. She emerged now, her face flushing with anger as she quickly assessed the situation. She started moving toward the table, but before she could get there, someone else stood up. Keanu removed his baseball cap and sunglasses, setting them carefully on his table. He didn't rush. He walked with quiet purpose toward where Tommy stood, now openly crying but still clutching his notepad like it was a lifeline. As Keanu got closer, several customers recognized him and whispers rippled through the cafe. But Keanu paid no attention to that. His focus was entirely on the young man who was being publicly humiliated for no reason other than being different. He stopped right beside Tommy and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Tommy looked up at him, confused through his tears, not quite recognizing who was standing beside him. Excuse me, Keanu said to Richard, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. I couldn't help but overhear what you were saying, and I think we need to have a conversation. Richard's eyes widened as recognition hit him. For a split second, his expression showed uncertainty, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. Oh, perfect. A Hollywood celebrity coming to save the day. How predictable. He crossed his arms, trying to maintain his aggressive posture. Listen, Mr. Reeves, I'm a fan of your work and all, but this doesn't involve you. I'm just trying to get decent service, which apparently is too much to ask in this place. Keanu's expression didn't change. If anything, his voice became even quieter, which somehow made it more powerful. Actually, it does involve me. I'm a customer here. I've been coming to this cafe regularly for months. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that Tommy here provides better service than I've received in restaurants that charge 10 times what this place does. Several customers had pulled out their phones now, recording the interaction. In the age of social media, moments like these could go viral in hours, but none of that seemed to matter to anyone in the moment. This was about something more fundamental than internet fame. This was about basic human decency.